Hello, everyone. This is Jeff Halper again with my March 2025 update and thoughts about where we are in terms of the Palestinian issue. Uh, Let me just start with a little bit of an update, at least a small update, because most of us are fairly informed in terms of what's happening with the news. I think in terms of the bigger political picture of Gaza, Trump, the international politics, and so on, it's clear that Netanyahu simply wants to continue the war. Netanyahu has his own agenda, which is staying out of court, keeping his government going, uh, and uh, and he wants to continue the war. And in a sense, Trump has said that doesn't really bother me. That's your decision. At the same time, Netanyahu is losing control of the situation completely. On the one hand, of course, Trump has completely bypassed him. And all of a sudden, Netanyahu and the Israeli government found out by chance almost that there's direct negotiations between the Trump government and Hamas. Not only that, but all the negotiations so far have been in separate rooms or separate floors of hotels because Israel refuses to meet Hamas, face to face. That doesn't bother Trump. I mean, Trump doesn't even know who Hamas is. He doesn't care. He wants a deal. So there are no other considerations except a deal. And so they're sitting with Hamas, which is completely flummoxed the Israeli government and getting into their own deals. And their own deals, of course, will finally overshadow, whatever kind of machinations Netanyahu is trying to engage in. So I think he's lost it from that. He's lost control of the political process. And on the other hand, of course, the families of the hostages, the captives, are super organized. I mean, there's still more than 50 uh, living people and also bodies of the Israeli captives in Gaza. And so that's a tremendous pressure. They want stage two of this peace agreement to go through, and I don't think public opinion is going to allow Netanyahu to reopen the war. So we're kind of at a interesting sort of a stalemate. But I think things are happening in Gaza that are still unpredictable, but I don't really see the war being rekindled. Trump, of course, is this completely unpredictable element, so we don't know. But in terms of the larger picture, of course, of what we're always talking about, how does settler colonialism end through normalization, keeping our eye on the big process, the three elements of settler colonialism are still progressing, coming to a culmination in a sense. The taking of the land, in the West Bank in particular, there's this tremendous campaign of settler violence. Settlers throw, I mean, the film about Musafa Yatta that won the Academy Award really captures that whole process of Palestinians being driven off the land in a very concentrated way today, a focused way, both through the settlers, but also, of course, with the support of the army. So the taking of the land, the pacification is the other element that's going on today. In other words, repressing resistance to a point where resistance becomes impossible. We've seen that in Gaza. We see this now in the northern West Bank where pacification campaigns are being conducted. 40,000 Palestinians have been driven out of their homes. And Israel talks about the Gazification of the West Bank. In other words, the idea being, and this has to do again with ethnic cleansing, of course, the idea that just as Gaza has been made uninhabitable, and therefore you have to move the 2.5 million people of Gaza somewhere else, which is exactly, what Israel would like to do in terms of transforming Palestine into Israel. The same is happening on the West Bank. If you can make especially the larger cities, Jenin, Tulkarm, Nablus, and the other cities of the north, uninhabitable, and like Sharon's 2002 defensive shield campaign, begin to move, and that's happening, the pacification process, this military campaign against any vestiges of Palestinian resistance from the camps in the north down through Ramallah and into Hebron and so on, you could conceivably make areas A and B uninhabitable and then create those same pressures of relocating the Palestinian population elsewhere. And then area C, that where you've already taken the land through the settler violence, then is annexed to Israel. And that then leads into the third stage, which is the normalization, which is coming down the pipeline, the whole idea of completing the Abraham Accords. According to news reports, Israel and Saudi Arabia have already completed basically their normalization agreement. It's all in place. And so that's the bigger picture that we always have to keep the focus on. What is Israel doing in terms of taking the land? How is Israel pacifying any Palestinian resistance? How is Israel making those parts of the occupied territory of the West Bank and Gaza uninhabitable so as to move out the Palestinian population, ethnically cleanse that area? And then how is this whole apartheid regime that emerges being normalized? So that's kind of a bigger picture. Let me just say in terms of this update as well, on a sort of a personal note, but a political note, is that together with my friend and colleague Issa Amro in Hebron, who's the head of an organization called Youth Against Settlements, who's been active for years and years, really the main force almost of resistance, in terms of his own body to the tremendous repression going on in Hebron. Issa and I have been nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. I feel a little funny about it because Mazen Kumsia, who's also a friend and colleague and a very worthy nominee, has also been nominated separately. Of course, we don't, it's not our decision of getting nominated. But, I think the nomination with Issa by a Norwegian parliamentarian, Ingrid Fiska, and the Norwegian Palestinian Solidarity Movement that was behind the nomination can really be very valuable for our work. I mean, the Nobel platform is a very it gives a legitimacy to your work in a sense. And I think it could be a very effective platform. And so Issa and I and our supporters and supporters of the Palestinian issue in general are working now to think, how do we translate this nomination into a platform of getting the message out about what's happening in Palestine and so on. So that's another development or whatever. What I want to talk about in the next few minutes is an issue, though, beyond the updates, an issue that I think is crucial that we have to really begin to deal with, and that is organization. Any political movement needs a political program, it needs organization, and it needs a strategy. In our case, a strategy both of affecting decision makers, of actually becoming political actors, and affecting political policy of governments, but at the same time, organization, and this is what would give us that power to mobilize the masses. I think our movement has really succeeded over the years in the Palestinian issue, achieving the level of the anti-apartheid struggle. I think today Palestine is a global issue, and I think it has achieved that level. But at the same time, of course, the Palestinian issue, faces challenges that South Africa didn't challenge. In South Africa, there could be a leadership, the ANC. I mean, there was repression, of course. Mandela was in prison for 28 years, but nevertheless, the ANC was able to function. There was a leadership. There was a a coherent kind of a program that was not co-opted by the South African government like the Palestinian Authority has been. So it was a genuine liberation movement, the ANC, and not a collaborationist kind of a thing that the PA has become. And of course, in South Africa, they had a political end game, one person, one vote. And therefore, the international organization was much easier. It was both a BDS organization, but an organization with a clear end game. And that we're lacking here. So that I think our challenge now is to take what we have achieved, which is the Palestinian issue at the level internationally of the anti-apartheid movement, and begin to try to translate it into a more effective political movement that's much more organized. And I just want to take just a couple minutes and give two practical kinds of suggestions or areas of proposals. First of all, of course, this has to be led by Palestinians. Any kind of political organization, a political program, a strategy has to be led by Palestinians. The problem is, of course, that there is no more PLO. That was always the authoritative hub and the vehicle of Palestinian resistance, liberation, policy, strategy, and so on. Now, there are attempts on the parts of Palestinians today. There was a meeting recently in Doha to try to, in a way, revive the PLO or some kind of a similar structure. We'll see how that goes because, of course, there's a lot of pushback, especially on the part of the Palestinian Authority to that. But there has to be some kind of a Palestinian organization and a civil society organization. Another problem, although I don't want to represent certainly the Palestinians, but at least in this update, we can begin to start this political discussion that hopefully my Palestinian colleagues will begin to feed into as well. And that is that the Palestinian Authority as a governmental authority is hostile to the liberation movement in Palestine. It's a collaborationist relationship with Israel. And the political parties have become dysfunctional. Without the PLO, the parties have become completely dysfunctional. And what's really interesting is that all the political parties, from the right to the left, from Islamic Jihad and Hamas to the PFLP and the DFLP with Fatah and others in between, are all really two-state parties. In other words, even the political parties' positions are completely irrelevant today to the reality that, in my view at least, has to go in the direction of one Palestinian state. So in the absence of a governmental authority, in the absence of political parties, Palestinian leadership devolves by necessity to civil society. And this is really difficult for civil society. There are dozens of Palestinian organizations. There are hundreds of really active, bright, engaged Palestinian activists on the ground, whether they're academic in terms of analysis or whether they're on the ground like the popular struggle committees and so on, or ISA in Hebron, or Mazen in Bethlehem, that are really doing the work. But the problem is that there's no organization here. So that there has to be, I think, a coming together of the Palestinians themselves networking, coming together, bringing these disparate people and groups together into what I would call a Palestinian coordinating committee. In other words, not a huge organization, nothing, because that doesn't really work, but a coordinating committee that would then work on the one hand to develop a political program and move together a strategy, and on the other hand, to work with the international, because with all the international organization and mobilization that there is, they're lacking direction. In other words, you're not going to liberate Palestine from London or Washington or Rio. There has to be a Palestinian leadership and direction and a program, and that today is lacking. So it really depends on this Palestinian kind of a leadership. Now, why hasn't that emerged? In my view, and I'm not a Palestinian, so again, this is an opening to invite a broader discussion. But in my view, I think the issue is suppression. The Palestinians face such tremendous suppression in the West Bank and Gaza, but also inside Israel, which is this much better in terms of some kind of giving political space to Palestinians than the occupied territories. Suppression, certainly on the part of Israel, obviously. I mean, Israel identifies every emerging Palestinian leader from the age of 12 and eliminates him or her. In other words, if you want to know, you have that question that the right wing asks all the time, where's the Palestinian Mandela? Well, the Palestinian Mandela is either dead or in jail. In other words, it's hard to convey the degree to which Israel surveys and controls and knows about the daily life of every single Palestinian. From its surveillance to its elaborate network of collaborators, to its military intelligence and so on. And there is no political space, really, very little political space for any kind of meaningful organization of the leadership that does exist in the occupied territory, in civil society. And at the same time, not only is it Israeli suppression, but the Palestinian Authority is just as suppressive, basically, as towards the Palestinian people as the Israeli government is. I'm part of the One Democratic State campaign, and we've asked, for example, our friends in the West Bank, for example, in Hebron, we said to them, let's have a meeting around this One Democratic State political program. Let's get together 10, 15, 20 people in someone's home or in a hall in Hebron and have a discussion. And the answer is we can't do that. Anytime we have more than 10 or 15 people meeting on a political program like this, the mukhabarat, the Palestinian security services are going to come in and break it up and arrest people. So the degree of repression and suppression in the occupied territory is one that prevents this kind of coming together and emergence of this alternative civil society Palestinian leadership. And therefore, I think this should be a part of our political program as well. We have to work, the internationals, and maybe Israeli activists as well, that have more political space and so on. We have to work to give the Palestinians in Palestine that safe space where they can come together and organize and begin to take leadership of the movement. And I want to suggest three things in particular to give them that space. First of all, there should be enforcement of ICJ and UN resolutions through the UN. I think we kind of neglect the UN as a field of activity. In other words, all the laws are in place. You've got, the Fourth Geneva Convention is the most detailed international law that prohibits Israel from doing everything it's doing in the occupied territories, from house demolitions to military invasions to building of highways to destroying the Palestinian economy to moving settlers into an occupied territory. This is all illegal. That's in place. The ICJ last year actually gave a verdict that we haven't really built upon very much that says the occupation is illegal for all kinds of reasons that you can read. Well, that should be part of our campaigning, is the enforcement of those laws and those rulings through the United Nations. Because if only the Fourth Geneva Convention is enforced, not only does the occupation kind of collapse by the weight of its own illegality, but it certainly gives the Palestinians in the occupied territory more of a space in which they can work. A second thing that I think we should do as a focus of campaigning is to take away the administration of the occupied territory from Israel. You know, today, the Palestinians are basically boycotted as an entire people. You cannot go visit Palestinians without permission of Israel, without going through either Ben Gurion Airport or the bridge on the Jordan Valley, you know, with Jordan in the Jordan Valley, and or at any rate on the border with Jordan, so that the Palestinians have been isolated from the rest of the world. That's illegal in international law, and not only that, of course, but you know, Israel is the one that's you know, again, through its surveillance and so on, is preventing free Palestinian movement, free Palestinian speech, political organization, and so on. Well, that shouldn't be Israel's discretion. In other words, there should be, I think, a decision that the UN takes over the administration, not the administration, maybe, because you have the Palestinian Authority. So in some ways, you know, you have to still respect that structure. So let's say to advocate for a situation in which the Palestinian Authority is still the governing authority, but there's a UN presence and a UN overseeing of both the Palestinian Authority to ensure that it doesn't repress its own people. So to protect, in a way, the ability of the civil society to organize and come together, and at the same time to prevent absolutely Israeli interference in anything that has to do with Palestinian political organization, which should not be in the province of Israel in terms of security or occupation. So I think that kind of a campaign of taking away the ability of Israel and the PA to suppress and control its own population, and therefore free Palestinian civil society to do that kind of organization that they know that they should be doing, but are unable to do today, should be part of our international campaigning. And finally, there should be a protection force in a physical UN protection force in the occupied territory, in the West Bank and in Gaza, that gives a physical protection to the Palestinians. I think if that was in place, then you could have then the Palestinians could come together and set up, if not the alternative PLO or a new PLO, at least this Palestine Coordinating Committee. And then what we have to do, what I think groups have to do abroad, is organize their own coordinating committees. There is in Europe the ECCP, the European Coordinating Committee on Palestine, which is a coalition of groups all through Europe. ICAD UK is a member of that. And that's a very good model, a very functioning model. But there should be a North American Coordinating Committee on Palestine, a Latin American CCPT, an Asian and African CCP. In other words, coordinating committees that bring together their organizations. And there was the ICCP, an International Coordinating Committee on Palestine, that existed about 25, 30 years ago. It was based in Geneva, and it was an international coordinating committee on Palestine that worked through the UN, but was in touch with Palestinian groups all over the world. So that structure, I think, is really crucial because we have many organizations working today, doing excellent work. There's all kinds of campaigning, but there is very little coordination, and there is no Palestinian leadership and direction. Again, because it's impossible for the Palestinians to take that role today, not because they're not capable or the leadership isn't there, but because, and that's why, again, I go back to this idea of giving them that political space, freeing them to become the leaders that they can be of the movement, and then better organizing the movement through these coordinating committees. Throwing out ideas, but this is the really missing piece of our work. I think we're all doing excellent work, but it has to be more coordinated, and it has to be around a political program. And I think this giving Palestinians a freer space in which to organize will also allow them to come together behind a political program. In my view, and I'm part of the One Democratic State campaign, um, one democratic state, replacing Israel and the occupation with one democratic state of equal rights for everyone, refugees coming home, is the only way out. It's the only really path forward. But it's the Palestinians that have to formulate the plan and move it forward. This is the Palestinian struggle, and therefore they need that kind of space, and we have to help them to create that space. And once they begin to take positions of leadership, then we have to organize ourselves better internationally and create that movement that can really, in which we can effectively be political players. Those are some thoughts. We welcome, of course, feedback, argument, discussion, whatever, but we've got to begin to think in terms of program, organization, and strategy. That's it from me, March 2025. Talk soon. Bye.